Hi, my name is Gary Hendershott. I'm here with my friend Richard Friedemann,
Correct.
who's a survivor of Auschwitz concentration camp. Actually, he went through 7 concentration camps during his teenage years. And he's tattooed on his left arm.
Which is Birkenau B.
Yeah, B4112. And we've been friends for 40 years. And Richard first told me his story about his life during World War II some 40 years ago, and we stayed up all night talking. That now we would like to share parts of Richard's story with you. Can you tell us about your liberation?
Obviously, the war was coming to an end, and Germans decided to eliminate all the witnesses of atrocities, so they decided to kill us all. We, at one point, the crew that guarded us in Messerschmitt factory was replaced by a die-hard SS group. They came in, surrounded the camp, took 500, they divided us forcefully into 500 people and marched us off into unknown. That really was a dead march, because anybody that couldn't walk fast enough and struggle behind or fell down because they were exhausted and from malnourishment, they were shot in a bag. But the SS were not caring if they leave the dead people laying. After the march, we were quartered for the night in an empty barn, huge barn, and suddenly 6 o'clock or even before that, it was still dark, and the barn door flew open, and we were beaten out, literally, out of the barn into the ground and marched another half a mile. The name of the area later I found out was Birkach, B-I-R-C-H-I, that's it, Birkach. That's the wood. It was a young wood. We noticed grave being already dug for us. They surrounded us, the SS guards surrounded us with a machine gun, and they told us to lay down, which we did. And the interesting thing was that shortly after we laid down, obviously the pilot, reconnaissance pilot, flying over the woods, spotted these blue and white stripes, like a carpet between the trees. Obviously, that's how he had to identify us, because shortly after that, he circled the area and pink smoke was let out of the plane. The smoke was slowly disappearing, but not very fast. And he marked the whole area. And we wondered, what was this all about? Are they going to bomb us? We didn't know what was going on. But about 35, maybe 40 minutes after that, suddenly we hear the clickety-clacks of the tanks and engines nearing by. The interesting thing was that the Germans very seldom will do something without an order. So the SS, later on we learned, waited for the order to shoot us, but the order never came. So they kept guarding us. In about a minute or two after that, the tanks appear with the jeeps leading and American GIs appearing, and there was a loudspeaker on a Jeep, and in a perfect German, one of the GIs is saying to the SS in a loudspeaker, he says, if you harm even one prisoner, we will shoot you all on the spot. Make sure that nothing happens here. If you behave, everything would be okay. And the SS were paralyzed. For a moment, they didn't know what to do. They abandoned the machine guns, and they got together to really have a powwow or decide what to do. And when they were grouped together, among us, there were Soviet prisoners who were obviously well trained. Suddenly we heard, "Hurrah, zabi banditu," which means, hooray, let's attack the bandits. And they all got up at one time and attacked the group that was standing there talking, the SS. They beat them up, they pushed them on the ground, they trampled them, and we got up and we ran also. And we actually ran over the SS.
Oh, get her, honey.
If any of them were trampled to death, don't know. Perhaps. But anyway, what happened?
Where did you run to?
We were just running, and the GIs were showing us, gesticulating, go this way, go, go.
Telling you to run behind the tanks?
Exactly. And what happened then is that we didn't have a chance to really thank these people. But as we were running, one of the soldiers had a guitar, and he was standing on a tank, and he was strumming and singing this song, "Don't Fence Me In."
Yeah, that's a Cole Porter song.
Yeah, that's the first time I have ever heard that song, and it was wonderful. But we were running to freedom, and we were completely crazed. The only thing we wanted to do is get away into freedom, and it was crazy. And about 600 yards, I spotted a Jeep, and there was a German officer, SS lieutenant, guarded by American sergeant. The American sergeant had a Thompson in his hand, and the German was sitting on the hood of a Jeep.
A Thompson machine gun.
Yes, Thompson machine gun. The sergeant is yelling at me, "Polski, Polski, or Ruski, what are you?" Of course, I didn't know English at this point, but I got it together. I say, "Polski." So he says, "Come here, come here, come here." So I'm traipsing to him. I stop running. He hands me the Thompson submachine gun. He cocks it, and he said, "Shoot, shoot, schießen, schießen," and points on the SS.
Shoot the SS officer.
Exactly. I grabbed the machine gun, and I said, "Ah," to myself, quietly in my brain. This is my chance. This is what I'm gonna get rid of, my whole anger and hatred. That's what I was thinking about. I grabbed the gun, I put the machine gun pretty close, and I see the German's eyes just got glassy, and I could see fear in his eyes. He was visibly shook that the guy in a striped uniform is gonna shoot him now. I think that's what he was thinking. And this happens probably in a minute, but my brain seemed to be acting as it would be at least 30 minutes. I had these thoughts going through. Should I not? Should I not? And my final thoughts before I decided was, what crazy thing you going to do? You're going to shoot one man? Is this going to bring your father back, your mother back, all the other people that were shot? No, that's crazy. And so I had my finger on the trigger. I released my finger, I completely relaxed, and I gave the Thompson submachine gun back to the sergeant, and I say thank you in Polish, but I'm not going to do what they did. And that was my decision. And it was a moment of epiphany, so to speak, you know. Shortly after the beginning of the war, in September 1939, we took one of the last trains from Krakow. We load up with many, many people into actual transports where they normally transport animals like cows and so forth.
So it was like a cattle car.
Cattle cars that were only left available.
Right.
And we went on our way, and near the famous woods in Niepołomice, that's the name of the place, the Stukas attacked the train, started bombing the area, and we ran into the woods. But they keep shooting at us. They knew we were civilians, but they still deliberately, they killed many people, machine gunned them between the carloads and the woods.
Yes.
Me and my mom jumped out from the carload and ran too. We found ourselves on the edge of the forest because the bombing started. And we have just ducked when a Stuka flew over and machine gun probably 3 feet away from our heads. My mom, interestingly enough, protected me with her body, particularly my head. She just protected me. I had to be about 9
years old.
9 years old.
Yes.
And when we emerged from the bombing, we saw mass of people totally slaughtered, pieces of people all over. And some people from the contusion or the explosion, the body literally changed into gooey stuff that was stuck to the tree.
Plastered, human bodies plastered to trees. Oh
yes.
my God.
And we survived that bombing, and believe it or not, in spite of the inflicted death, we continued on food. There was no other way, because the train was bombed out, and many other trains ahead were also bombed out, so you couldn't use train. So we actually went all the way to Lviv.
Which is now in Ukraine.
Now it's Ukraine. Before it was area where the Soviets, while the Germans attacked from west, the Soviets simply attacked from the east. So we decided to go back to occupied by Germans, Krakow, not knowing how Nazis will totally disregard international laws of civilians. Neither did we know exactly how they dealt with the Jews. And of course we were Jewish. So not knowing that, we felt that maybe the Germans were more intelligent than the Russians, and therefore we will be able to survive better. And so we have with many other people who were feeling the same way, hired a smuggler for a certain amount of money to get us on a river San in a very small boat on the other side with a German occupation. Needless to say, it was a dangerous trip because the Germans patrolled one level, one edge of the river, and the Soviets patrolling the other. We traveled to the Krakow, and there, believe it or not, we did find our father, my father, who somehow also penetrated from the Soviet-occupied area into German-occupied area. And we found him in our old home where we resided before the war. It was shortly after that that the Germans came into our house, possibly denounced by some kind of a local spy. We were thrown out with 30 pounds of personal possession outside of the house, and we were out. After that, we traveled, in order to avoid further harassment, we traveled to a small city, small town, village really, called AUSCHWITZ, and there we hid. But unfortunately, after a while, we felt that pretty soon the German Sonderkommandos would come in and start shooting us in the village. So we drifted slowly to the Krakow. We hid in the Krakow in two places. My mom, Lila, was in one place because we couldn't be all together, and we in another place. Unfortunately, we could not cook, so Lila, my mom, was able to prepare food, and we had a pre-established area where we would meet. One day, she didn't come. She didn't deliver the food. We knew something was wrong. It was at that point that she was identified by somebody as a Jewish person. She was on the Aryan papers. The owner of the house that we rented in AUSCHWITZ gave her her own ID card, and the idea was that she was to identify with this, but it wasn't enough. They took her for investigation. They took her in a Montelupi political prison, and 1 week after she was murdered in a courtyard of the, I only found it out after the war. I didn't know, I know my mom was missing, but I never knew that she was executed 1 week after arrest. We were a little suicidal at that point, and we were actually walking around Krakow without any documents, hoping that the Nazis will grab us and we will wind up the same way that my mom. At the same time, that didn't happen. Following this attack, they liquidated that camp and put us on a transport to Auschwitz. They put about 500 to 600 people, women and men and children, whatever there were left, into a cattle cars. We had absolutely no privacy, and because of the military trains that had the priority toward the east, where they were fighting Russians, many times we were stopped. So the trip to Auschwitz was 3 days long, and during that time we didn't eat anything, but we had to relieve ourselves. So actually, the way that we relieve ourselves would be that we cordon off corner, and whoever needed to, urinate or defecate would go into the corner where that would happen. So you can imagine the horrendous stink of the feces mixed with urine, women was particularly traumatized with this. So the men cordoned off the place and stood back to the women so they could undress and perform whatever they need to do, etc. Everybody knew that we were going to our sure death. So a bunch of stronger and more rebellious people began to cut floor, which was very old, of the collards with simple little pocket knives. And they had plenty of time to do it in 3 days. And they actually eventually dig out a hole that you can put your head in, and if you squeeze correctly, if you're skinny enough, you can pull your body through and jump through the hole into the between the railroad tracks, hoping that the train would go by and you can roll it out and get into freedom again, maybe join the partisans or something. And 3 people tried after the hole was big enough, and they all unfortunately were shot because we didn't know that there was on every carload on a roof there was 1 machine gun, SS guarded with machine gun, and they spotted them as they were rolling out between the wheels of the moving train. However, there was a very desperate couple, a woman who was pregnant and who knew that if she comes to the camp, she will die anyway because she was pregnant, and the Germans would definitely recognize this and kill her and the baby. And she felt that maybe that is the right thing for her to do, is to try to escape. So after the 3 men were shot, even though she heard the shots and screams, she managed to lower herself in and jump down. However, unfortunately, she died between, I think the movement of the train created wind or whatever, and she got between the wheels and she was killed. Her husband got suicidal, followed her, but he went head down and he committed suicide. After that, nobody tried to even get out. That was it. 2 days after, we wound up on the edge of the entrance to Auschwitz. As we all emerged from the wagons, from the carloads, all the belongings that we have had was thrown out. Canada was moving the belonging, and in between they were whispering to us little slogans. You never get out of here except for the chimney, which we did not understand totally, but it was ominous. We had to line up women on one side, men on another, and doctor, including Dr. Mengele, was selecting who is going to live and who is going to die. But of course, we didn't know when we lined up until we began to see that the older and more crippled people were going to the left, and more people with a certain amount of musculature and not totally emaciated would go to the right. The same thing was for the women. The women had a more difficult in undressing to the half because of the natural feminine protection of the private body, including breasts. And if they did not really take the shirts, they were whipped with horse whips on the breast.
Terrible.
By appointed SS people that forced them to undress halfway. The doctors would examine us halfway. I happened to wind up at Dr. Mengele's line. I didn't know his name at that point, but somebody whispered the angel of death. That's how they called him. And knowing that the Germans were dealing better with the military posture, I took my chest out, I stood at attention, and I almost wanted to salute, but I didn't because it was stupid. But there I stood, and of course I was already somewhat thin, but not completely emaciated. He looked me over, he poked me around, he says, go to the right. So I went to the right. About that time, a woman, which was a little girl that was selected from the woman to the left, together with grandfather, tried to get away from the group from the left to join the mother that was selected to the right.
To life.
And they would, yeah, to the life. And the SS would stop the little girl. So the mother, out of her horrible fear for the young girl, ran toward the girl, trying to, I'm not sure, stop her or maybe join her. But in the midst of all this tragic moment, one of the SS shot both of them, bayoneted the girl and shot the mother.
So they bayoneted the child,
Yes.
the little girl,
Yes.
and then they shot the
The
mother.
girl couldn't be more than 5 years old.
Huh.
Yeah. And I still remember how she was dressed. Up to this day, she had a red coat. So in my memory, she was a little girl in a red coat.
Let's stop for a minute.
Yeah. I gotta compose myself.
I know it's bringing back a lot of memories.
Yeah, I didn't think this was gonna happen, but
It's okay. You got me crying too. So, all right, glass of wine, Signore.
I am going to look at the meat now.
Okay. Well, have a glass of wine.
No, I don't want to have a glass of it. I get more emotional if I do. The women in Auschwitz really had worse time than the men. The supervisor of each unit in a camp were composed of SS women who were extremely cruel. And a lot of them have been simply caught on a street of Krakow or other city, an internment for, I don't know, inflicting a pain for the Polish population. They were all Christian. There were some Jewish, of course, too, but a lot of them were Christians and maybe other religions. But some of the inhuman situation that they have experienced was not only the privation from lack of food and lice and disease and cold, but for instance, they never had underwear. They do not issue in camp underwear. We didn't have any underwear either, but we put up with it easily. But can you imagine a woman in a dress without, they had to feel extremely vulnerable. The German SS was sworn to a so-called, what they call Rassenschande. Anybody that was non-Aryan or not clean German of Aryan behavior, Aryan culture, would be diminishing their own being by having intercourse with them.
What about women that were not Jewish, that were stuck in the camp or trapped in the camp, brought in? What happened to them?
a lot of women that were beautiful. You're talking about the beautiful women?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were particularly important asset, so to quote, of the camp. They were taken from occupied France, Yugoslavia, Bosnia Herzegovina, Poland, many maybe even political women in Germany, and put in poof houses or whorehouses. Poof houses are named for a whorehouse in German. And they were, as you can imagine, the principle of running the Auschwitz and other camps was, how I want to say, morally corrupted system. They deliberately set up a system which was dehumanizing and morally destructive to people by different means. So the diminishing of the moral situation of each prisoner was very important to the German idea of how to create a system where the prisoner wouldn't have the strength to rebel and attack. It was a deliberate psychological way of avoiding trouble for them, okay, because they had few and we had many. So that's the way they control. So they put these beautiful women deliberately captured with the idea of what they're going to be in the poof houses.
Prostitutes for the SS.
Yes. And for them not to be able to escape from the role, they tattooed the whore right on the left breast.
They tattooed their breast.
Yes.
Whore.
Yes, whore. What Canada has told me through the wires, through the inquiries, whenever they were useless anymore, or didn't want to cooperate sexually, they were killed. In between the camps, there was a road that led to crematorium, and I knew that it was that road. It was not paved road, it was stone, crudely laid stone on the road. And I see something is moving from a distance. And when you see the fog lifting from the early sun, it felt like a shimmering something coming but moving forward. So I was fascinated by it, wondering what it was. And pretty soon I see people walking. And the people were naked, completely naked women, probably 150 of them, walking on that horrible road, being beaten and called names. And as they emerged toward me, I could, because I was probably like 200 feet away watching this. It was a real surreal sort of a thing that you never imagined.
Were you ever selected for death?
Yes, I was one time. At that point, I believe I had mumps, and my right part of the face and neck was swollen. So the guy that looked over the prisoner for selection looked at me, and he didn't even ask me to strip. He just plainly pulled me out from the ranks on the side and commandeered me to the right side of the group. Interesting thing that saved my life at that point was that just about the time the SS pulled me out from the ranks and I stood to the right, I noticed Soviet prisoners that had entirely different garb. They had a military beat-up jackets and pants, green. They were coming through with a stone wagon pulled probably by six people, huge wheel wagon, and they were spreading stone in an area. They never stopped. They continued to walk toward me and a group and make believe that they put in the stone, which, that was their job. And SS did not particularly pay attention. In about that moment, when they're about halfway away from me, there was another prisoner selected. He began to run in a different direction. So immediately the SS pulled out the revolvers and started shooting at him. And that was another moment when suddenly the Soviets really picked up the step. Seeing me on his side, they understood what this is all about. And in Russian, they said to me, "Молодец, сюда, иди сюда," which means in Russian, "Come with us, come with us. Young man, come with us." And so at the moment, there was such a momentary chaos that I was able to, I looked for the SS, they're looking away, and I jump almost into the car lot, stripped my uniform off, dumped it on the ground because it would be visible, my stripes versus the Soviet uniforms, which were different. And I pulled the wagon away from the area, pushing right with them. And that's how I was saved. And at that really point, even though I didn't particularly have a great love for the Russians, to me, they were my liberators again, Next day, which really happened. But in the meantime, the night was, in a way, very, very terrific because we never been able to really see into the crematoria, but from the roof of the barrack, I was really able to, not exactly to see, because you couldn't see, but hear and see the fire coming out from the chimneys. So it was audible murmurs of death and screams because the whole mass of people were burned, poisoned and burned at the same time. And I heard dying, screams and noises, and then silence, and then...
They were in the gas chamber.
Correct. And in about an hour or so after that, suddenly smoke came out and fire burst. And it was so powerful that the you see the fire coming out from the chimney, maybe like 2 feet over the chimney. The chimneys were very high. And you could see the whole sky from the fire to be reddish, orange red. That was extremely nightmarish night. I didn't sleep a wink. I was just thinking about what was happening inside of the chamber, the poison chamber, and how these people died. Next morning, I returned to my barrack with a new jacket, a new number. An interesting thing happened. The block leader, who knows everybody in the barrack, knew that I was selected. He had to know. But he has never squealed or never reported me. Why? God knows. But that's how I survived.
Well, I'd like to say thank you, Richard, for telling your story.